What if I told you that a royal reunion, one that the world believed could mark a turning point in history, collapsed in less than an hour? Imagine this. Clarence House, a symbol of regal authority and family heritage, was supposed to be the stage for a long-awaited reconciliation between a father and his estranged son. Instead, it became the very place where the fragile ties holding them together snapped. And not in private, not hidden away from whispers, not tucked behind palace curtains. No, it happened in a way that the world was never meant to see. The question is, how does a father, who also happens to be the King of England, come to the decision to order his own son out of his home just 54 minutes after sitting down to talk? Let's set the scene. Clarence House, built in the 1820s, has been home to countless moments of royal diplomacy, quiet family evenings, and, yes, explosive arguments whispered about but rarely confirmed. This was not just a reunion between Charles and Harry. It was a test of whether years of fractures, bitterness, and resentment could be bridged. The air outside was thick with speculation. Paparazzi stationed at every possible exit, journalists ready with drafted headlines for reconciliation or rejection, royal watchers glued to every update. This was supposed to be history in the making, and in many ways it was. Just not the history Harry hoped for. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Harry had crossed oceans to be here. Think about that. A man who had once lived and breathed within the walls of this institution had abandoned it, fought it, exposed it, only to come back to its heart, seeking something no crown, no title, no royal decree could offer, a father's acceptance. Can you imagine the weight of walking up those steps, knowing the eyes of the world and the eyes of your own family are piercing into your back? How do you reconcile being both an insider and an outsider at once? But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Reports say that before Harry even crossed the threshold, Clarence House staff were already on edge. Whispers among footmen suggested the king's patience was thin. Aides glanced at the clocks, briefing Charles in hurried tones, as though time itself was their enemy. And maybe it was, because just 54 minutes later, time ran out. What's striking is how quickly the hope dissolved. 54 minutes is the length of a podcast episode, a TV drama, or a drive across London in bad traffic. That's all it took for what was billed as a peace talk to devolve into something so irreparable that the king, not just a father, but a monarch, pointed to the door. The speed of the collapse suggests that tensions weren't just under the surface. They were right there, simmering, waiting to erupt. And then, the footage leaked. Grainy, imperfect, but unmistakably damning. The footage that would shift this story from speculation to sensational revelation. A shaky lens capturing Charles's sharp gestures, Harry's slumped shoulders, the stiff, uncomfortable posture of staff trying desperately to look invisible. You see, in a monarchy where secrecy is survival, a single leak is more destructive than 1,000 rumors. So why did this leak happen? Who wanted the world to see this collapse? Was it a disgruntled staff member? A carefully orchestrated palace maneuver? Or something even closer to Harry himself? Now, let's pause for a moment. Imagine you're Harry. You've been branded the outsider, the rebel, the prince who chose love over duty. And yet, a part of you still aches for home. Not the castle, not the crown, but the simple word, family. You walk into Clarence House, heart pounding, carrying years of resentment in one pocket and a flicker of hope in the other. You're not just facing a king. You're facing the man who raised you, who buried your mother, who shaped your destiny. And less than an hour later, you're walking out, rejected, humiliated, and exposed. This isn't just a story about monarchy. This is about fathers and sons, about the endless cycle of expectation and disappointment, about how power twists even the simplest of relationships into something unrecognizable. And here's the truth. When a father kicks out his son, the wound is personal. But when a king does it, the wound becomes national, even global. Let's not forget the ghosts that haunt Clarence House. Diana's presence lingers in every corner, in every whispered word between father and son. Did Harry invoke her memory in those tense minutes? Did Charles flinch, as he has so many times before, when her name was raised? Because history has shown us that nothing splits the royal family faster than Diana's shadow. And if that shadow hung over this reunion, then maybe the end was inevitable. But here's where the contradiction lies. Charles, who has spent decades fighting for legitimacy, for respect, for love from the public, now risks it all by rejecting his own blood. What does that say about the state of the monarchy? What does it say about Charles himself? And what does it mean for Harry, the man forever cast as both villain and victim in the royal saga? The press outside Clarence House didn't need official statements to sense the collapse. They saw the signs, tightened lips, hurried movements of staff, cars shifting position. When Harry finally emerged, the cameras clicked like 1,000 accusations. His face told a story the palace would rather have buried. Defeated, resigned, perhaps even angry. And yet, the real explosion wasn't out there on the street. It was still unfolding behind those doors, in conversations that no lens could capture, but that insiders are now whispering about. Think about the symbolism. Clarence House was meant to be a place of refuge, of fatherly wisdom, of continuity. Instead, it became the setting for rejection. The irony is almost Shakespearean. A king, burdened by duty, cannot find space in his heart for his own son. A son, desperate for connection, is reminded that crowns weigh more than compassion. This isn't just drama. This is tragedy unfolding in real time. And here's the most unsettling part. If it can happen here, in the gilded halls of royalty, what does that say about the rest of us? How many families have been torn apart not by thrones and crowns, but by pride, stubbornness, or words said in anger? How many people watching this footage will see their own fathers, their own sons, their own broken reunions reflected in this royal spectacle? That's why this story matters. Because beneath the diamonds and pageantry lies something deeply human, betrayal. But as much as betrayal stings, the true drama lies in what came next. The footage only showed us fragments, gestures, postures, partial words. The full picture? That's still shrouded in whispers and speculation. And if the first 54 minutes ended in expulsion, what does that say about the words exchanged in those final, tense seconds before Harry was told to leave? Because the truth is, Clarence House has seen scandals before. Affairs, arguments, political backstabbing. But never something like this. Never a father banishing his son under the weight of both personal grievance and national duty. That is unprecedented. And unprecedented events have consequences. So, what happened in those last few minutes? What was said that pushed Charles to act so decisively, so ruthlessly? That's where the story sharpens, where the drama turns from personal pain to historical turning point. And it's where we'll go next, into the room, into the argument, into the eruption that changed everything. From the very first second Harry's car pulled up to Clarence House, there was an undeniable tension in the air. The kind of tension you can't fake, the kind that sits heavy, wrapping itself around every stone, every shadow, every breath. Royal watchers lined the gates. Journalists scribbled notes that hadn't yet been written, and cameras clicked with the ferocity of lightning striking again and again. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be a casualty between father and son. No, this was a collision course. And from the look on Harry's face as he stepped out, you could already tell. He wasn't walking into reconciliation. He was walking into a storm. Now think about this. Harry had been gone for years, carving out a life in California, redefining himself as not just a prince, but as a man free of the palace's suffocating grip. And yet, here he was, back again, standing at the door of Clarence House. Isn't there something almost ironic about that? You can escape across the ocean, but somehow, you always end up at your father's doorstep when the chips are down. But here's the twist. Clarence House isn't just a home. It's a fortress of tradition, a reminder of everything Harry tried to leave behind. From the very first step across the threshold, he wasn't just entering a building. He was stepping into a battlefield where old wounds waited to be reopened. Inside, the atmosphere was stiffer than the starched collars of Charles's uniform. Footmen moved quickly but quietly, eyes down, trying not to register the frost in the air. Aides whispered behind doors, documents shuffled, cups of tea prepared and left untouched. Everything about that moment screamed of a family reunion in name only. And Charles, sitting upright, spine stiff, the embodiment of a monarch who can't decide whether to embrace his son or banish him outright. Here's the question. What do you say when you've spent years trading barbs through interviews, memoirs, and leaks? only to find yourself face to face again. Do you start with "Hello, son?" Or do you begin with "Why are you here?" According to whispers from insiders, it wasn't warm pleasantries. It was businesslike, clipped, and heavy with unsaid accusations. Charles is said to have opened with something along the lines of, "We don't have much time." Imagine hearing that from your own father. Not, "I'm glad you came." Not, "Let's sit and talk." Just a clock ticking down the moment you walk in. Harry, for his part, carried himself with a mixture of defiance and hesitation. He wanted this meeting, yes, but did he want it to heal or to confront? That's the contradiction. You can see it in every photo of him that day. Shoulders squared, but eyes darting, jaw clenched, but lips trembling. He came prepared for a fight, but secretly longed for an embrace. And isn't that the essence of every estranged child? The need to be right battling the need to be loved. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. Staff inside Clarence House reportedly kept glancing at one another, sensing that the energy was off. These people had seen royal spats before, doors slammed, tempers flaring, even shouting matches between senior royals. But this was different. This wasn't just about protocol or petty disagreements. This was a father and son, ripped apart by years of pain, trying to fit decades of betrayal into a single conversation. And within minutes, the room grew colder than the London air outside. But let's pause for a moment and ask, why did Harry even agree to this meeting? Was it a desire for reconciliation? Or was it pressure from Meghan, from the public, from his own conscience? And on the flip side, why did Charles agree? Because he wanted peace? Or because, as king, he knew optics demanded he at least try to mend the rift? These are the questions that make this encounter so compelling. On the surface, it was a reunion. But underneath, it was a chess match where every word, every pause, every glance was a calculated move. As the minutes ticked by, those watching the situation unfold, aides, staff, and even the security detail, realized this wasn't heading toward a warm father-son embrace. The conversation was stiff, transactional, almost like negotiations between two rival nations. Charles spoke of duty, of responsibility, of the monarchy's survival. Harry spoke of hurt, of betrayal, of his right to his own truth. Two men, locked in a battle not just for their relationship, but for the narrative that history would remember. And here's the bitter irony. Clarence House, with its portraits of ancestors who endured wars, scandals, and abdications, was once again bearing witness to history. A new fracture, a new headline, a new ghost added to its walls. Because in that room, reconciliation was slipping further away with each passing second. 54 minutes. That's all it took for the meeting to collapse. Think about it. Marriages fall apart over years. Friendships dissolve over months. But this? A father and son unraveling in less than an hour. That speed tells us something crucial, that the reunion was doomed before it even began. This wasn't a fresh start. This was the final act of a play that had been running for years. So what exactly went wrong? Some say it was Harry bringing up his mother, Diana, in a way that cut Charles to the bone. Others claim Charles couldn't stomach Harry's continued criticism of the monarchy. And then there are whispers that Meghan's name was the spark that set everything ablaze. Whatever the trigger, the fuse was already lit long before Harry walked through the door. Here's the cliffhanger. As Harry sat across from his father, watching the minutes slip away, he didn't yet realize that the decision had already been made. Charles wasn't inviting him in for reconciliation. He was preparing him for rejection. And when the king finally gave the order, the world would never see Harry the same way again. Sometimes words aren't necessary. Sometimes a glance, a shrug, or the tightening of a jaw tells the entire story. And that's exactly what unfolded inside Clarence House during those 54 minutes. The body language between King Charles and Prince Harry didn't just hint at tension, it screamed it. Long before the supposed argument reached its climax, their posture, their gestures, even the way they breathed around each other betrayed what no press release would ever admit. This reunion was never built on trust. Let's start with Charles. Observers say he sat rigid, shoulders back, chin slightly elevated, the kind of posture that screams authority but conceals insecurity. His arms, often folded or resting tensely on the armrests, gave the impression of a man barricading himself against an oncoming storm. His eyes, narrowed, not with curiosity or warmth, but with the controlled sharpness of someone who had already rehearsed this moment in his head and was bracing for impact. Isn't it fascinating how even kings can look cornered, even when they sit on thrones of power? Now compare that to Harry. He didn't sprawl out or sit comfortably. No, he leaned forward, not with eagerness, but with desperation. Hands clasped too tightly, as though holding on to his words before they spilled out. His shoulders carried the weight of years, slumping slightly, betraying fatigue that his carefully rehearsed defiance couldn't fully mask. Every so often, he would run a hand across his beard or rub his temple, classic signs of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. It's one thing to sit across from your father. It's another to sit across from a monarch who feels more like a stranger than family. But here's where it gets striking. Charles reportedly avoided direct eye contact for much of the meeting. Instead, he glanced at aides, at papers, even at the clock on the mantelpiece. What does that tell us? Avoidance. A refusal to fully meet his son in the moment. Meanwhile, Harry locked his gaze on his father almost obsessively, as though trying to pierce the armor, trying to remind him, "I'm your son, not your subject." It's a tragic image, isn't it? A son searching for recognition in the eyes of a father who can't or won't look back. Let's not ignore the room itself. Clarence House is filled with portraits of monarchs and consorts long gone, silent witnesses to centuries of power struggles. Imagine sitting there, surrounded by the stern faces of your ancestors, while trying to negotiate the wreckage of your own relationship. Every tick of the clock, every shift in a chair, every shallow breath would echo in a room that heavy with history. The environment itself added to the suffocation, amplifying every unspoken word. Now let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a room where two people are arguing without raising their voices? Where the tension is so thick you feel it in your bones, even if you can't hear the words? That's what Clarence House became in those minutes. Charles's lips tightened with each passing second. Harry's hands gestured wider, sharper, until the gulf between them wasn't just emotional, it was physical. And then came the tells. Harry's foot tapping beneath the table, betraying impatience. Charles's fingers drumming against the chair, signaling irritation. These weren't random movements. These were subconscious admissions that the conversation was spiraling out of control. Aides standing nearby noticed it too. The subtle but unmistakable signs of two men locked in silent battle long before words boiled over. There's also the matter of silence. Oh yes, silence can be the loudest gesture of all. Several times during the reunion, long pauses stretched between their exchanges. Charles, staring into the distance, lips pursed, while Harry leaned forward, waiting, almost pleading for a response. That silence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was condemning. It told Harry exactly where he stood, on the outside of his father's patience, on the edge of rejection. But here's where the story takes its sharpest turn. The leaked footage, shaky, grainy, incomplete, captured snippets of this body language. A raised hand from Charles, not in greeting, but in dismissal. Harry shifting abruptly in his chair, as if ready to stand, his expression caught between disbelief and fury. A staff member in the background looking down, clearly wishing to be anywhere but there. This wasn't reconciliation. This was theater, and everyone knew the script was about to reach its climax. And think about this. Body language doesn't just expose the present. It foreshadows the future. The way Charles crossed his arms, the way Harry leaned too far forward. It was all a physical manifestation of where they were heading. Collision. Expulsion. 54 minutes to disaster. But what makes this even more devastating is how relatable it is. Strip away the crown, the palaces, the flashing cameras, and what do you see? A father unwilling to soften. A son desperate to be heard. How many of us have sat at a table, hoping for love, but receiving judgment instead? That's why this story resonates. Because behind the royal masks, they mirror the fractures of countless ordinary families. Yet this isn't just any family. This is the monarchy. And in monarchy, body language isn't private, it's political. Every twitch of a finger, every shift of posture, becomes a symbol, a message, a headline. That's why this leaked footage matters. Because it didn't just capture a family argument. It captured the unraveling of a dynasty, moment by moment, gesture by gesture. And then came the moment. The footage shows Charles raising his hand sharply, almost like a gavel striking down. Harry's eyes widen. His chair scrapes against the floor. The silent cues turned into action. And just like that, the reunion turned from icy to explosive. But what exactly was said in that moment? The body language told the story of collapse. However, the words revealed the wound. And those words were about to cut deeper than anyone imagined. The camera doesn't lie. That's the terrifying part of this story. While words can be twisted, statements denied, and palace aides spin narratives until they shine like polished silver, leaked footage is different. It's raw, it's unfiltered, and it leaves no room for excuses. That's why when the supposed footage from Clarence House began circulating, it wasn't just gossip anymore. It was evidence. Picture the scene. A shaky handheld lens, likely from a discreet staff phone or hidden security feed, captures a moment that was never meant for public consumption. The quality isn't perfect, blurred edges, grainy focus, muffled sound, but that almost makes it more damning. Because authenticity is often ugly. And this was ugly. The first thing viewers noticed? The atmosphere. You could feel it, even through the camera. Charles, sitting upright, hand clenched around the arm of his chair. Harry, leaning forward, gesturing sharply, his body vibrating with frustration. They weren't two family members reuniting. They were adversaries locked in a duel, fighting not with swords but with words, and posture, and silence. One of the most striking moments in the footage shows Charles lifting his hand. Not a gentle, fatherly gesture. Not a wave of acknowledgement. No, this was a sharp, cutting motion, like a judge calling order in court. His lips move, but the sound is garbled. Still, the intent is unmistakable. A command. A directive. A dismissal. And then Harry. His face flushes, his jaw tightens. He pushes back his chair with a screech that cuts through the muffled recording. For a split second, he looks stunned, almost like a child caught off guard by the harshness of a parent. But then the defiance kicks in. His hands move wide. His voice rises, not enough to hear the words clearly, but enough to know this wasn't just conversation. This was confrontation. Now, here's where the contradictions make it irresistible. Palace insiders rushed to downplay the footage, insisting it was taken out of context, that it showed only a fraction of a broader, more nuanced conversation. But here's the question. If that's true, why scramble so quickly to contain it? Why call emergency meetings? Why pressure media outlets? Why lean on lawyers to suppress distribution? Because the truth is, context or not, the images alone told a devastating story. One freeze frame from the footage went viral within hours. Charles, finger pointing toward the door, his face set in stone, while Harry, half risen from his seat, stared back with eyes full of both rage and disbelief. That single image became a symbol. A king casting out his son. A son caught in the moment of being rejected. No words necessary. And then there's the background. People often forget to watch the extras in these royal dramas, but the staff in the footage told their own story. A butler glancing down, avoiding eye contact. An aide pressing her lips together, as if holding in a gasp. Another shifting awkwardly, clearly wishing to be anywhere but trapped in that room. These weren't rehearsed performances. These were candid, human reactions, the kind that palace PR can't rewrite. But here's the irony. In trying to contain the footage, the palace only magnified it. The more they tried to pull it from circulation, the more it spread. Screenshots, re-uploads, slowed-down analyses flooded social media. Commentators broke down every flicker of Charles's eyebrow, every twitch of Harry's jaw, like body language detectives solving a crime scene. And in a way, it was a crime scene, not of law, but of trust, of family, of monarchy itself. The most haunting part of the clip comes near the end. You see Harry pause, his hands frozen mid-gesture, his lips moving slowly. For a second, he looks less like a prince, less like a rebel, and more like a son on the edge of breaking. His shoulders drop. His expression shifts. It's not anger anymore. It's devastation. And Charles? He doesn't move. He sits frozen, rigid, the king above the father, the monarch above the man. That image alone sent shivers down the spines of those who saw it. Now, ask yourself this. Why was there even footage to begin with? Clarence House is one of the most guarded royal residences, with strict rules about recording. Phones are checked, cameras banned. So how did this moment slip through? Was it an accident? Or was it deliberate? A leak from someone inside who wanted the truth out? And if deliberate, who stood to gain from exposing this family fracture to the world? Could it have been a disgruntled staffer, fed up with palace secrecy? Or perhaps someone closer, someone who believed the world needed to see the reality behind the facade? Theories exploded online. Some argued the footage was a setup, carefully leaked by palace factions to discredit Harry further. Others insisted it was Harry's allies who wanted to show the cruelty of the monarchy. Still others whispered about Camilla's involvement, her shadow looming over the meeting even if she wasn't in the frame. But here's the point. Whether staged or genuine, whether leaked by friend or foe, the footage achieved one thing that words never could. It made the fracture undeniable. People could debate Harry's memoir. They could question his interviews. They could doubt the palace press briefings. But seeing? Seeing is believing. And once the world saw those 54 minutes collapse in real time, belief shifted forever. And yet, the footage only told part of the story. It showed gestures, faces, emotion, but it didn't capture the words. The words that cut, the words that pushed Charles to order his son out, the words that left Harry's face etched with disbelief. And it's those words, the invisible soundtrack behind the images, that hold the true key to what happened inside Clarence House that day. Because what was said in those tense, final moments didn't just end a reunion. It triggered a chain reaction that would echo far beyond those walls. Every royal conflict, no matter how modern, no matter how seemingly detached from the past, eventually circles back to one name, Diana. And inside Clarence House that day, Diana's ghost wasn't just a presence. It was the unspoken third party at the table. You could almost feel her shadow stretching across the room, woven into every glance, every accusation, every moment of silence between Charles and Harry. Because let's face it, Harry cannot step into a royal room without his mother's memory walking in beside him. And Charles cannot look at Harry without being reminded of the woman whose love and tragedy defined both their lives. Think about this. Harry has spent years openly invoking Diana's name in interviews, memoirs, even documentaries. He's positioned her as both his guiding light and the ultimate reason for his mistrust of the institution. He sees in her the same battle against an unfeeling, rigid monarchy. So when the tension inside Clarence House began to rise, is it any surprise that Diana's name slipped into the conversation like gasoline poured onto a flickering flame? According to whispers from those briefed on the exchange, Harry referenced his mother directly, accusing Charles of repeating the same mistakes. He reportedly said something like, "She warned us about this, about the coldness, about the sacrifice of family for the crown. And here you are, proving her right." Can you imagine how those words must have landed? For Charles, Diana has always been the wound that never fully healed, the ghost that never released him from its grip. Hearing her name thrown back at him in anger by his own son, that was more than a sting. That was a knife twisting. And here's the irony. Charles has spent decades trying to rewrite his narrative in the shadow of Diana. His marriage to Camilla, his eventual coronation, his measured public demeanor, all of it aimed at reshaping himself as something more than the man who failed her. But in that room, none of it mattered. Because to Harry, Charles wasn't the king. He wasn't the monarch. He was simply the man who let Diana down. And now, in Harry's eyes, he was letting his son down too. The body language in the footage suddenly makes more sense when viewed through this lens. That sharp gesture from Charles, the rigid stillness that followed, it wasn't just frustration with Harry. It was defense, the kind of defensive reaction that comes when an old scar is ripped open without warning. Imagine being confronted not only with your son's disappointment, but with the lingering voice of the woman who shaped an entire generation's view of you. But Harry didn't stop there. Insiders say he pushed further, drawing parallels between Diana's treatment by the royal family and Meghan's. "You couldn't protect her, and you won't protect us," he reportedly said. That's not just an accusation. That's a condemnation. It's one thing to critique a system. It's another to lay your mother's death at the feet of your father and then suggest he's repeating history with your wife. That kind of accusation doesn't just bruise. It detonates. Here's where the emotional stakes rise higher than ever. To Harry, Diana was more than a mother. She was proof that the system destroys those who don't conform. To Charles, Diana was both love and failure, passion and disaster, forever tied to his public identity. And when Harry invoked her that day, The room itself seemed to freeze. Aides shifted uncomfortably. The silence stretched long enough to feel suffocating. And Charles? His jaw clenched. His hands tightened. His eyes grew distant. It was as if Diana herself had entered the room, and everything else dissolved into insignificance. Now ask yourself, what father can withstand being told he failed not only his wife, but also his son? What man can hear his own child weaponize the memory of the woman he lost and not react? This wasn't just Harry raising his mother's name in grief. This was Harry holding Diana up as a mirror, forcing Charles to see himself as the villain in both past and present. And Charles, ever the man who craves control, couldn't bear it. And here's the chilling part. The footage, grainy as it is, seems to show the precise moment when Diana's name entered the fray. Harry's gestures grow sharper, his face redder, his body leaning forward as if to hammer the point home. Charles leans back, eyes narrowed, lips pursed, hands gripping the chair so tightly his knuckles blanch. It's the portrait of a man retreating inward, bracing himself against a tidal wave of memory he never asked for. But there's another layer here. For the public, Diana is a saint, a martyr, a symbol of love against cruelty. For Charles, she's something else, a reminder of his humanity, his failures, his weakness. And when Harry invokes her, the public inevitably sides with Diana's son. That's what makes it so dangerous. Because Harry wasn't just arguing with his father. He was summoning a ghost the entire world reveres, a ghost that Charles can never outshine, no matter how many crowns sit on his head. And yet, here's the cruelest twist. In that room, Diana was both weapon and wound. For Harry, her presence was strength. For Charles, it was unbearable shame. And when two people clash with a ghost between them, there can be no reconciliation, only ruin. The conversation spiraled quickly from there. Words sharpened, voices rose. Charles reportedly snapped back, insisting that Harry's obsession with invoking Diana was manipulative, unfair, and destructive. To Harry, that only proved his point. That his father had never truly understood her, had never truly honored her. The ghost of Diana had entered Clarence's house, and neither father nor son could withstand her shadow. And that's when the breaking point came. Because Charles, pushed beyond his patience, beyond his composure, made the decision that stunned the world. He gave the order that changed everything. He told his son to leave. But what role did Camilla play in this explosion? Because while Diana's ghost loomed over the room, there was another woman's presence, quieter but no less influential, shaping the outcome in ways most of the world has overlooked. She wasn't in the leaked footage. She wasn't captured in those grainy frames that showed Charles gesturing sharply, Harry half rising, and aides frozen with discomfort. But make no mistake, Camilla was there. Maybe not physically in that exact room during every second, but her influence, her presence, her shadow loomed over every word exchanged at Clarence's house. Because where Charles goes, Camilla follows, not always in sight, but always in spirit. And when it comes to Harry, Camilla's existence is a wound that has never, ever closed. Let's rewind for a moment. Camilla Parker Bowles, now Queen Consort, was once the other woman. For Diana, she was the thorn in her marriage. For Charles, she was the love of his life, hidden away in the shadows until he fought to legitimize her. And for Harry? Well, that's where it gets complicated. Over the years, Harry has spoken politely, even diplomatically, about Camilla in public. But behind the veneer of civility lies a deep resentment, not just for what she represents in the story of his mother, but for the role she now plays in shaping his father's decisions. So imagine Harry walking into Clarence's house, already nervous, already tense, already bracing for rejection. And on top of that, he knows Camilla has Charles's ear. That no matter what is said in that room, her voice will echo in his father's thoughts, her perspective will weigh on the scales. To Harry, it's not just him versus Charles. It's him versus a united front, the king and queen, the husband and wife. Doesn't that change the entire balance of power? Here's what makes this even more fascinating. Reports suggest Camilla was present during part of the meeting, perhaps at the start, perhaps stepping in briefly as tea was served. Witnesses noted her composed, almost detached demeanor. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't confrontational. She was measured. Some say she murmured something to Charles at one point, a quiet aside that seemed to stiffen his resolve. What did she say? We may never know. But body language experts who've studied Charles for decades will tell you this. When Camilla leans in, Charles listens. And that's what Harry couldn't bear. To him, Camilla isn't just a stepmother. She's the symbol of everything he believes destroyed his parents' marriage, the emblem of a monarchy that prioritizes image over love, tradition over truth. So when he saw her in Clarence House, even briefly, it was like Diana's ghost being mocked by the flesh and blood presence of her rival. And you know Harry, he can't keep that inside. His expressions, his tone, his very posture must have betrayed the storm raging within him. The irony, of course, is that Camilla herself has always been careful with Harry and William. Polite, gracious, even understated in her dealings with them. But perception is reality. And Harry's perception of her has been shaped by years of pain, loss, and unresolved anger. So even if she said little that day, her silence alone may have spoken volumes. Sometimes the most powerful presence in the room is the one that doesn't speak at all. Now consider Charles. Here's a man who waited decades for the world to accept Camilla, who endured ridicule, scandal, and public hatred to stand by her side. For him, defending her isn't just marital loyalty, it's a matter of identity. She is his choice, his partner, his queen. So when Harry, implicitly or explicitly, dismissed her influence or invoked Diana against her, Charles wasn't just defending his wife. He was defending himself, his choices, his life story, his reign. And here's where the dynamic gets explosive. According to one insider, Charles reportedly snapped at Harry with a line referencing Camilla directly, something along the lines of, "You will respect her, whether you like it or not." That's not just an order. That's a father drawing a line in the sand. And for Harry, already feeling alienated, already bristling under years of rejection, those words were like gasoline on a fire. Because to him, respect for Camilla feels like betrayal of his mother. It's a zero-sum game. You can't have both. This is where the tension in Clarence House shifted from icy discomfort to outright volatility. Because Harry, sources claim, shot back, making it clear that in his eyes, Camilla would never replace Diana, never earn the love or respect she craves. Imagine saying that to your father, the father who fought his entire life to legitimize the woman beside him. In that moment, reconciliation became impossible, and the staff noticed. The leaked footage may not show Camilla, but her absence speaks louder than her presence. Insiders say she slipped out of the room, perhaps sensing the storm brewing, perhaps deciding not to be part of what was about to happen. But her shadow remained, because every time Harry looked at Charles, he saw her influence. Every time Charles spoke, he echoed her counsel. Every time the conversation grew sharper, Camilla's name was the unspoken wedge between them. Now let's step back and ask the audience, how would you react? Imagine sitting across from your father, knowing his loyalty lies with someone you can never accept. Imagine feeling like your mother's memory is being erased, rewritten, overshadowed by a woman you believe caused her pain. Could you stay calm? Could you reconcile? Or would every word feel like an attack, every gesture a betrayal? That's the weight Harry carried in that room. And here's the cruel irony. Camilla may not have raised her voice, may not have slammed her hand on the table, but she was the most decisive factor in how this meeting ended. Because her shadow forced Harry to see not a father reaching out, but a man already claimed, already aligned, already immovable. And Charles, in turn, wasn't just a king speaking to a subject. He was a husband defending his wife. And so, when Charles finally gave the order, when he told Harry to leave Clarence House, it wasn't just about the words exchanged in those 54 minutes. It was about years of ghosts and shadows, of Diana's memory and Camilla's presence, colliding in one room, in one argument, in one devastating moment. But what about William? Because even if Camilla's shadow was suffocating, another influence lingered, one just as powerful, just as divisive. The older brother Harry once loved, once envied, and now barely speaks to. And it was William's invisible hand that shaped the very outcome of Clarence House. Even when he's not in the room, William is there. That's the cruel irony of Harry's life. His brother's presence is so deeply stitched into the fabric of the monarchy that Harry cannot escape it. And inside Clarence House that day, even though William never set foot in the meeting, his shadow loomed just as heavily as Camilla's. Because whether Harry likes it or not, he is always being measured against William. And in Charles's eyes, William is not just the heir, he is the standard. Let's rewind. For years, palace insiders have whispered that Charles leans heavily on William when it comes to difficult family matters. William isn't just the son who stayed loyal. He is the son who embodies duty, the son who has never publicly broken ranks. So when Harry walked into Clarence's house, he wasn't just meeting his father. He was facing the invisible hand of his brother, guiding the conversation, tilting the scales, shaping the judgment. Doesn't that make the whole meeting feel like a rigged game from the start? Reports suggest that Charles referenced William multiple times during the discussion, not in anger, but as a point of comparison. Your brother understands, he allegedly said. Or perhaps, your brother accepts his role. Imagine hearing that. Imagine sitting across from your father, trying to explain your pain, only to be told, directly or indirectly, that your brother does it better, that you failed by comparison. Isn't that every younger sibling's nightmare, to always be second best, even in your father's eyes? And let's not forget Harry's memoir. In Spare, he laid bare the resentment he carried for years, being the spare to William's heir, being the backup plan rather than the chosen one. He wrote of sibling rivalry, of fights, of simmering bitterness. So when Charles brought William into the conversation that day, even subtly, it wasn't just a casual mention. It was salt poured directly into an open wound. The footage itself seems to hint at this. At one point, Charles leans forward, his hands steepled, his lips moving carefully, his expression calm but stern. Harry, in response, slams his palms onto his knees, his mouth moving faster, sharper, more animated. Analysts slowed down the footage and suggested this was the exact moment William's name entered the argument. Harry's reaction wasn't just frustration. It was rage, the kind of rage only triggered by years of feeling overshadowed. But here's the part that palace aides don't want the public to know. William may not have been there physically, but he had already played a part in shaping the meeting. Sources say Charles and William had spoken earlier that week, discussing Harry's visit. William, ever protective of the crown, reportedly warned his father not to give in to Harry's demands. That advice, whether said in passing or delivered with conviction, would have sat in Charles's mind like an anchor. So by the time Harry arrived, the decision was already half made. And Harry? He must have sensed it. Imagine the sinking realization, as you sit across from your father, that his words aren't fully his own, that the brother you can't trust anymore has already whispered in his ear, already tilted the ground beneath you. It's no wonder Harry's gestures grew sharper, his tone more desperate. He wasn't just fighting Charles. He was fighting William's invisible hand, the heir who always wins. The irony, of course, is that William himself is caught in a web of pressure. He knows the monarchy's survival depends on his steadiness, his loyalty, his ability to contrast himself with Harry's rebellion. So his invisible hand isn't just about sibling rivalry. It's about survival. William cannot allow Harry to destabilize the crown. And Charles, aging, vulnerable, and anxious about his legacy, clings to William as the safer bet. That dynamic leaves Harry perpetually out in the cold, no matter what he says or does. Now, let's bring this back to the audience. Can you imagine living your entire life being compared to your sibling, not just by your parents, but by the entire world? Every mistake magnified, every failure amplified, every act of defiance contrasted with your sibling's obedience. And worse, imagine knowing that your sibling has a voice in whether your father accepts or rejects you. How do you not break under that pressure? How do you not lash out? And that's exactly what happened inside Clarence's house. One insider claims Harry finally snapped, raising his voice to say something along the lines of, "Stop using him against me. I'm not William. I'll never be William. And you need to accept that." Those words, raw and unfiltered, cut through the room like a blade. Because they weren't just aimed at Charles. They were aimed at decades of being the spare, at a lifetime of comparison. Charles's reaction? That infamous gesture, the raised hand, the finger pointing toward the door, may have followed shortly after. Because for a king who values order and hierarchy, hearing one son rage against the very structure that sustains the monarchy was the ultimate affront. The irony? Harry left Clarence House not just rejected by his father, but once again defined by his brother. The reunion wasn't just about Charles and Harry. It was about William's silent but crushing influence. And that's what makes this moment so devastating. Even in rejection, Harry couldn't escape being measured against his brother. But what exactly pushed Charles from irritation to action? What made him shift from sitting stiffly in his chair to ordering his son out of Clarence House? The answer lies in the ultimatum he delivered, the final straw that shattered any hope of reconciliation. Fathers give advice. Kings give orders. And on that day inside Clarence House, Charles stopped being a father and became every inch the king. The moment the meeting tipped beyond recovery, when the weight of Diana's ghost, Camilla's shadow, and William's invisible hand pressed down on the room, Charles delivered the ultimatum. Not a plea, not a request. An order, sharp, final, and impossible to misinterpret. Let's build the scene. The tension had reached its breaking point. The footage, grainy though it is, shows Charles leaning forward, his body stiff, his jaw locked. Harry, face flushed, had just slammed his palms onto his knees, voice raised in desperation. The silence that followed was deafening. Staff in the background froze, their faces betraying the dread of what was about to come. Then Charles moved. He raised his hand, not in welcome, but in command. His lips formed words that, though muffled in the footage, were later whispered by insiders. Either you accept this family as it is, or you leave. It was the Clarence House ultimatum, a line drawn in the sand. Charles, weary of years of conflict, wasn't just addressing Harry's complaints. He was defending the monarchy itself. He was saying, in no uncertain terms, this family does not bend. This crown does not compromise. You are either with us, with me, or you are nothing. Can you imagine hearing that from your own father? Imagine sitting in a room, desperate to be understood, desperate to be seen, and instead being given a choice that is no choice at all. Harry's eyes, according to those who claim to have seen the footage in full, widened in disbelief. His lips parted as if to speak, but for a moment, no words came. Because how do you respond when your father tells you to accept everything you've fought against, or walk out the door? But here's where the twist lies. Harry did respond. Reports suggest he shot back something along the lines of, "If that's the choice, then you've already made it for me." That sentence, simple but devastating, encapsulated everything. It wasn't just defiance. It was resignation. It was the moment Harry realized there would be no reconciliation, no middle ground. His father had chosen the crown over his son, and Harry, for all his fire and fury, couldn't change that. The footage, though muffled, seems to show Harry standing then, the scrape of his chair audible even through the shaky lens. His body language was unmistakable, shoulders rigid, arms tense, fists clenching and unclenching as he tried to control his temper. Charles remained seated, unmoved, his finger gesturing toward the door. That image, a son rising to leave, a father staying rooted in his throne, is Shakespearean in its tragedy. Now let's talk about what this ultimatum really meant. It wasn't just a father telling his son to fall in line. It was a monarch making a political calculation. Charles knows the monarchy is fragile. He knows public trust wavers. He knows Harry, with his interviews, his memoirs, his Netflix deals, is a destabilizing force. And so, the ultimatum wasn't just about Harry's behavior. It was about the survival of the crown. In Charles's mind, unity requires obedience, and obedience requires sacrifice. But here's the cruel contradiction. Charles demanded loyalty, yet loyalty cannot be forced. It can only be given freely. And by issuing that ultimatum, by framing the choice as accept or leave, Charles ensured that Harry could never choose him. Because Harry's entire identity, his rebellion, his exile, his public truth-telling, is built on refusing to blindly accept the institution. Charles didn't just push him away. He gave him no way back. And think about the symbolism. 54 minutes. That's all it took for Charles to boil down decades of fatherhood into a single ultimatum. No embrace, no forgiveness, no path to healing. Just a cold, stark choice. Family as monarchy, or no family at all. And Harry, standing there, must have realized in that instant that he had lost his father not just as a parent, but as a man. Because once a king makes a decree, it cannot be unsaid. The aides in the room reportedly avoided eye contact, their faces pale, their bodies rigid. They knew they had witnessed history, and not the kind anyone would want their name attached to. One whispered later. It felt like the walls were closing in, like we'd just seen the crown destroy what little bond they had left. That's the weight of an ultimatum. It doesn't just change the moment. It changes everything after. But here's the haunting question. What did Harry say as he reached for the door? Was it anger? Was it heartbreak? Did he curse the monarchy? Did he whisper something softer? A final plea that went unanswered? That's the part the footage doesn't fully capture, the part insiders disagree on. Some say he muttered under his breath, "You'll regret this." Others insist he simply said nothing, his silence louder than any outburst could be. Either way, the effect was the same. Harry left Clarence House not as a son reconciled, but as a man rejected. And Charles, by delivering his ultimatum, sealed the narrative. The king had chosen the crown over his blood. But the story doesn't end at that door. Because outside, waiting with bated breath, was Meghan. And when Harry stepped out, the look on his face told her everything. And her reaction, fierce and furious, was about to escalate the fallout far beyond the walls of Clarence House. Outside Clarence House, the air was different. Not heavy with the suffocating silence of a father and son clashing behind closed doors, but sharp, electric, alive with the clicking of cameras, the shouts of reporters, the hum of speculation. Meghan was waiting, not in the shadows, not hidden, but positioned exactly where she knew Harry would find her the moment the ordeal ended. And when he emerged, his face pale, his jaw tight, his shoulders heavy with the weight of rejection, Meghan didn't need to ask what had happened. She already knew. Here's the thing about Meghan. She's not a silent observer in Harry's story. She's a catalyst. For years, critics have blamed her for pulling Harry away from his family, while supporters argue she simply gave him the courage to act on feelings he'd buried for years. Whichever side you fall on, one thing is undeniable: Meghan reacts. She doesn't absorb conflict quietly. She fires back. And when Harry walked out of Clarence House that day, she fired back with more than words. Witnesses nearby claim Meghan's eyes flashed the second she saw Harry's expression. She reportedly muttered under her breath, too low for cameras to capture, but clear enough for Harry to hear, "They'll never change." It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't comfort. It was conviction. And "I told you so," rooted not in pettiness, but in years of believing the monarchy would never truly accept them. Harry, sources say, tried to stay composed, but his body language betrayed him. He clenched his fists, shook his head, muttered something that made Meghan place her hand on his arm. To outsiders, it looked like a wife offering comfort. But to those who know Meghan, it was more than comfort. It was fuel. She was already calculating the next move. Because Meghan knows the game. She knows that optics are everything. And at that moment, Clarence House had already begun spinning the narrative. Aides briefed select reporters that the meeting had been cordial, but cut short due to scheduling conflicts. A laughable excuse, considering Harry's face alone told the real story. Meghan, ever the strategist, understood what had to happen. She and Harry would have to take control of the narrative before the palace buried it beneath layers of carefully crafted lies. And here's the dramatic irony. Meghan's anger wasn't just about Harry. It was about herself. Because deep down, she knew her name had been in that room, even if she wasn't physically present. Diana had been invoked. Camilla's shadow had loomed. William's hand had steered the conversation. But Meghan? Meghan was the spark. Insiders claimed Charles and Harry's argument escalated the moment her name entered the fray. "She's changed you," Charles reportedly said. Imagine hearing that. Imagine being reduced not to your own choices, but to someone else's supposed influence. So when Harry walked out, Meghan saw not just her husband's rejection, but her own. A rejection of her, of their children, of the family they'd built outside the palace walls. That fury, that insult, simmered behind her calm exterior. Witnesses described her eyes narrowing, her lips tightening into a thin line. She wasn't going to forget this moment. Now let's talk about what happened next. The couple reportedly drove away in silence at first, Harry staring out the window, Meghan tapping her fingers against the door handle. But once the cameras were out of sight, the silence shattered. Meghan, according to one insider, said bluntly, "They will never forgive you because they will never forgive me." That line, chilling in its clarity, summed up the entire saga. Harry wasn't being punished just for his choices. He was being punished for choosing her. And here's the part that really stings. Meghan's fury didn't stop at words. She began planning, almost immediately, how to respond. Whether it would be through allies in the media, a strategic leak, or even the careful release of their own footage or statements, Meghan knew they couldn't afford to stay silent. Because silence, in the royal game, means surrender. And surrender is not in Meghan's vocabulary. Harry, torn between humiliation and exhaustion, reportedly hesitated. He didn't want another war, not so soon, not so public. But Meghan, fueled by anger and conviction, reminded him of what was at stake. "They'll keep doing this until we stop them," she allegedly told him. And in that moment, Harry knew the fallout wasn't over. The fight wasn't behind him. It was just beginning. Let's not forget, Meghan has always understood the power of narrative better than anyone in the royal family. Where they rely on centuries of tradition, she relies on modern media, on global platforms, on shaping public opinion. And as news of the Clarence House blow-up spread, Meghan was already preparing to counter the palace's spin with her own version of the truth. But what form would that truth take? A sit-down interview? A carefully worded statement? A strategic leak to a sympathetic journalist? Or something bigger, something that would shake the monarchy at its core? Because one thing is certain, Meghan wasn't going to let Clarence House write the ending of this story. She was going to pick up the pen herself. And so, while Harry was still reeling from his father's ultimatum, Meghan was already mapping out their next move. A move that would draw the battle lines sharper than ever before. A move that would ensure the world saw not just a son rejected by his father, but a family cast out by a monarchy terrified of their truth. But before Meghan could act, Clarence House was already moving at full speed. The royal PR machine, well-oiled and relentless, was about to turn this scandal into yet another war of narratives. And this time, the palace had no intention of losing control. The palace never sleeps, especially not when scandal threatens to crash through its walls. By the time Harry's car pulled away from Clarence House, the royal PR machine was already in motion. Phones buzzed. Aides rushed into side offices. Draft statements were reviewed, revised, and prepared for strategic release. Because here's the truth. In the monarchy, perception is power. And perception must be controlled at all costs. Think about it. Within minutes, carefully chosen words were being whispered into the ears of trusted journalists. The meeting was cordial, one aide reportedly told a royal correspondent. It ended earlier than expected due to the king's schedule. Cordial. Schedule. Two words designed to soften the blow, to bury the reality under polite, palatable lies. And here's the kicker. Those phrases appeared in headlines almost immediately. Newspapers ran with the line, radio anchors repeated it, and within hours the official story had been established. But the footage ruined everything. Because while the palace was spinning cordiality, the world was watching Harry slam his chair back, Charles pointing toward the door, and aides frozen in horror. The leaked video ripped the mask off the PR machine. And once that mask slips, it's nearly impossible to put it back on. Still, Clarence House tried. Crisis meetings were called deep into the night. Senior advisors debated strategy. Should they ignore the footage, dismiss it as doctored, or acknowledge it with vague phrases like misrepresented context? In the end, they tried all three. One outlet was fed the line that the clip was misleading. Another was told it was heavily edited. And yet another was assured that the king remains committed to maintaining a private relationship with both his sons. But here's the problem with throwing out multiple stories. Contradictions only fuel suspicion. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's camp watched in real time as the palace churned out spin. According to insiders, Meghan was furious. "They're lying again," she reportedly told Harry, pacing their living room. And Harry? He was torn, exhausted, humiliated, but also burning with the desire to tell his side. To finally, fully expose what had really happened inside those 54 minutes. And he knew, as he had always known, that the palace was bigger, louder, and faster at controlling the story. Unless he struck back. The question is, how did the public react to the dueling narratives? On one side, the centuries-old machinery of royal PR. On the other, the raw, shaky footage that seemed to show a father casting out his son. The result was chaos. Social media split in two, hashtags trending worldwide. Hashtag Team Charles and hashtag Team Harry clashed like digital armies. One clip in particular, Charles's finger pointing to the door, became a meme overnight, repurposed as everything from a symbol of rejection to a punchline about family arguments. But here's the deeper truth. This wasn't just a PR war about a family spat. It was about the monarchy's survival. If the public came to believe Charles had coldly ejected his son, sympathy would swing toward Harry. If they believed Harry had provoked and disrespected his father, then the monarchy could stand firm. That's why Clarence House fought so aggressively. They weren't just defending Charles. They were defending the crown itself. And make no mistake, this wasn't their first rodeo. The royal household has weathered scandal after scandal. Diana's Panorama interview, Andrew's Newsnight disaster, Meghan and Harry's Oprah revelations. Each time, the machine adapts, recalibrates, and refocuses the narrative. The difference this time? Technology. In an age where anyone can leak footage to millions in seconds, the old system of controlling newspapers and broadcasters no longer guarantees victory.